Welcome to another edition of Cheers to Careers. I'm Steve Ridinghouse, the Career Outreach Coordinator at the School of Journalism and Mass Communications at KU.
Hello and welcome to another episode of Cheers to Careers. I am Steve Ridinghouse, the Career and Outreach Coordinator for the KU School of Journalism and Mass Communications. Today we are joined by Travis Goff, Director of Athletics of KU. Welcome, Travis.
Steve, good to be here. I'm looking forward to it.
And congrats on your 2-year anniversary. I think the actual date was, April 5th? And you've been busy for 2 years.
It's been certainly an eventful 2 years, but it's been amazing, being back here at KU and getting not just reacquainted, but, literally kind of digging those roots even deeper than what they've been over my journey, kind of starting off in the state and at KU as a student. It's been a really amazing couple of years.
And when you look back at those 2 years, I know things are moving quicker than you expected, but I think about the national basketball title. I think we had a Sweet 16 in volleyball. Of course, the football success. I think that surprised a lot of people how quickly that came along. Liberty Bowl, 3 sellouts, game day, and then just recently, women's basketball.
Yeah.
Had that nice run WNIT. I mean, when you look back, are you thinking, this is too good? Or is this what you expected?
Well, I don't think the reality is you don't know what to expect in terms of competition. And when you come in, I think, new in this role in particular, outcomes in competition are almost a little bit secondary because in some ways they're the things that we as athletic directors least directly control in terms of immediate, right? So trust me, I'm the first to say men's basketball national title had nothing to do with it. Zero. Athletic director in his first year or whatever it was. That's a credit to the men in that program, Coach Self and his staff. You start to think about developing and building culture and have an ambition for competitive success. You start to see the bar get raised across the department. Then you can kind of start to feel like there's some impacts around how you're trying to set particular tones. And I think some of those other examples are a department that in general is raising the bar for what success looks like in every facet, not just in competition.
And if my math's right, I think in your 2 years, you've hired 3 head coaches, correct? Women's golf, football, and baseball.
You got it.
So when you hire head coaches or just personnel in general, what are you looking for? Are there certain traits that you start right away before you kind of work your way down?
Well, I think it's it's certainly not science by any means, but I think at the forefront of it is integrity and character. I mean, and that's not just saying that. That's not just somebody telling you that. That's literally going deep enough in a search, being diligent enough in a search, doing enough real deep background reference, and then talking to candidates multiple times over to sift through and understand a person of incredible character, incredible integrity, and a background in it that demonstrates that, right? And so I think that's really a great place to start. Another dynamic that I think back on all 3 of those searches for those head coaches that you referenced, all 3 of them wanted to be here at KU. None of the 3 had strong ties to KU necessarily, but they all 3, for a variety of reasons, understood this to be an incredible place, a special place, amazing opportunity in those roles, and they really brought that to life in an important fashion. So outside of that, there's definitely nuances. What women's golf needed is not necessarily the same as what football needed in terms of where those programs had been, and on and on and on. So there's some customization beyond that, but I think those core attributes are absolutely paramount when you're going through a search.
And speaking of that, like what every program needs, I mean, what have you learned about your time as an athletic director? I mean, you've got 16 programs, I believe, here at KU. I mean, how do you determine the priorities? And I know that's kind of a puzzle. And I mean, how do you put that all together?
Well, I think one of the core responsibilities of an athletic director is to understand what part of my role or parts of my role impact the entirety of the organization. And if you have an understanding of that and you're spending significant time in those realms at a high level, then you can impact 16 programs, for example. Because the reality is you're not going to have an ability to attack all, in this case, 16 unique needs, right, for each of the programs. And so how do you address it from a high level? What are the most important aspects of moving those programs forward? And frankly, there's an ebb and flow. So a year ago at this time, I'm certainly evaluating where baseball was at that moment in time. I'm certainly recognizing that there may be a transition in that head coaching position, and I'm going to spend more time and zero a lot more in on baseball at that moment than I would in other typical cycles, other typical seasons, so to speak. And I could obviously similarly with kind of the women's golf dynamic. Once you get the right people in place, and if you got an organization that has a commitment to excellence, a lot of the rest of it just kind of churns and takes care of itself. Now you get into a program like football, that's taking attentiveness, awareness, involvement, if not half the day or a portion of every day, certainly weekly, in order to make sure that football is supported in the right fashion and we're moving forward.
And women's basketball, I might be wrong, but I assume they were probably maybe one win away from making the NCAA tournament.
Yeah.
Were you committed to like getting as many home games as you could at Allen Fieldhouse? I mean, was that like, let's make this happen?
Yeah, the cool thing about the women's basketball story is I really believe, and you don't know this for certain, I believe we were the first team out, literally the first team out of the tournament. Had we won that first game in Kansas City, no question we're in, like a lock and probably a pretty good seed, to be honest. So being the first team out is tough to swallow. We let the team determine if they wanted to continue to compete in the WNIT. We didn't say, you're doing it, deal with it, accept it. Coach Schneider, to his credit, talked to the team, gave them some time to ponder and talk to amongst themselves without coaches, without administrators, and they came back and said, let's go. Let's get after it. So that was a strong statement to us. Like, this is a team that wants to fight. They want to compete. They want to get better. They want to capitalize on the circumstances. And once they started and they started doing what they did right out of the gates, myself and Nicole Corcoran, who's our wonderful sport administrator and senior women administrator for the department, we just, by the game, said, we're not sending this group to Columbia, Missouri. We're not sending this group to Lincoln, Nebraska. We're not sending them to Fayetteville, Arkansas, or Seattle, Washington, and let's continue to do it right there in Allen Fieldhouse. It was awesome. And, you know, we absolutely needed to put resources to the table because it's a bidding process, but the young women, they did it all. And then the fan support just cemented that we needed to be right here in Lawrence.
And I know I went to that Missouri game. That was awesome.
Yeah.
And it just seemed like game to game, the crowd just, you could just see it expand.
It was so fun. It's done wonders for that program. It's done wonders for support around that program. And probably never will you say it's better to be in the WNIT than the NCAA tournament. But in this particular case, it's a great runner-up, right? To obviously have been at home, build a fan base, build that energy in the community, and have a team playing as good a basketball as probably the final 8 teams in the NCAA tournament.
So when Travis Goff from Dodge City graduated in 2002 from KU, made that walk down the hill, were you thinking someday I'm going to come back as athletic director? Or what were you thinking?
Well, who knows what I was thinking back then? Not very much. Probably I was thinking about what was going on that evening after commencement and after going down the hill. But I was at that point already working in the athletic department in the Williams Fund. And so I was getting this great experience, a couple years under my belt of understanding what the intersection of college athletics, business, et cetera, how that looked and what that could provide in terms of a career. So I was excited about, what that could hold. At that juncture upon graduation, I was probably more comfortable than I ended up being around being here at KU, which is an interesting thing to say because this is this is in my blood. I grew up with it, right? All I could have ever dreamed of was working for Kansas Athletics. And at that moment upon graduation, I was doing it. And it was about to convert into a full-time gig. But it wasn't but another probably year, maybe year and a half later, there was this clear recognition that I needed to leave the nest. I needed to go and experience other places. Didn't have really any clear clue on where that might be. No targeted approach to that, but it was this recognition that I was going to grow more outside of my comfort zone than had I stayed in the comfort zone. And that's what kind of led me down the path to be willing to make that jump to Tulane in New Orleans.
So when you made that leap, Tulane, did you think, hey, I'm ready, or was it kind of that leap of faith, or a little bit of combination of both?
For a reason I probably can't put my finger on, is there's always a variety of factors. I was confident. I was, had this clarity of, I can do this. I can leave my good buddies. I can leave a place I know and love. I can leave comfort zone. I can leave family, and I can go to one of the most foreign places in our country in New Orleans, right? It's one of the more unique places, certainly in the States. And I can give this job a go, and I can go and work hard and do my best and kind of see where it takes me. It was almost a no-lose proposition. So I did leave with confidence. And I know for certain there was a variety of reasons for that confidence, my upbringing, the support from my family. But certainly my experience here in the J School was a big part of it, the sometimes challenging dynamics of working through the class load and the projects and the things that come your way through this program. And then without question, also the, I guess call it handful of years I had working in the athletic department down the hill for KU.
And you are from a family of Jayhawks, correct? You always had kind of a Jayhawk upbringing?
Yeah.
So coming to KU that was your one and only
Kind
choice?
of a no-brainer. Growing up in Dodge City, people tell me there's a lot of purple around. I never even noticed it. It was all crimson and blue all the time for me. That just was in my family with cousins and uncles, and my mom and older brother, younger brother went. My dad played basketball down the road at Baker and was in Lawrence all the time. So we were Jayhawk fanatics. That's what we knew.
And speaking of your journalism experience here, what kind of skills do you use like day to day? I know we're really big on written communication, the oral communication, presentation, being persuasive in speech. I think you got all those taken care of.
Listen, you nailed it. I mean, I could go on and on. I could probably think back to 6 to 8 classes, and I could point out a few things. But ultimately, the things you just said, and I'll say it in my own words, were precisely what I apply every day. And I've said it, and I mean it. I apply it every day in my job. And written communication is at a core. I think back around some of the great professors I had, and Charles Marsh being one of them, and just that foundational discipline around writing and going, you know what, that's never going to leave me. And now I'm the biggest stickler in the department.
Yeah.
People are like, oh my gosh, the AD cares that much about writing, and we got to nail it. I'm like, yeah, we got to nail it. We got to nail it every time. Working with groups, right? So this idea, I think back around some of the projects, right, of how are you sharing a responsibility, sharing a load? How are you having expectations set around all of multiple people, different backgrounds, different experiences, coming together to say, this is what we're trying to achieve for this particular project. And honestly, there's a lot of aspects, in my opinion, of higher ed that doesn't give you that. And until you get that, you're not ready for what's coming. And every day I think about how do we bring groups together, how do we get alignment in a shared commitment, and that's a trait and application every day. I think about the anxiety of standing in front of my peers in presentations and going, oh my gosh, is there anything worse? And then with a little bit more work and effort and refinement, now it's multiple times over the course of the day. And there's maybe things more important than that, but there aren't a lot of things more important than being able to stand in front of a group with some confidence and articulate a message, and without hesitation. That I think really started right here in the J School.
And speaking of projects and messages, I know you had a really robust communication plan when you unveiled the Mississippi Street Gateway project in Allen Fieldhouse. So your handprints were all over that, I take it? Yeah,
direct involvement. I enjoyed it. Brought back to my core in a lot of ways. You think about PR and strategic communications, no question.
Fundraising, I'm always amazed. I mean, kind of the timing of it. I mean, doing the Gateway project, I mean, obviously football, tremendous momentum. And I'm thinking back, I remember like 2007, 2008, KU football was showing some strides, and there was some talk about doing a renovation, but it just really did not take off. I mean, what have you learned about fundraising and timing?
Not a science. You need some breaks, and I think back a little bit. One of the things I understand better now around the momentum of 7 and 08 and 09 was there's that thing called the recession that smacked everybody in the face, and that was definitely a variable. I have to think, I wasn't here, but I have to think that was a variable in that fundraising effort. Again, you don't get to necessarily chart the perfect time to make what in this case are major solicitations of some of your best supporters. And so you need some things to kind of break your way. You need certainly that target, that prospect to believe in the vision. They need to understand it more broadly than what a literal facility means. And in our case with the Gateway 11th and Mississippi project, that's at the core. This isn't just about certainly football. This isn't just about a football stadium. This is about the entire campus community, Lawrence region and beyond. And so I think that's definitely resonating. And then you really have to kind of take the appropriate, you don't get to skip steps in my estimation. Even if the steps aren't completely clear, you have to go through the right process. You have to listen. You have to understand timing dynamics for those prospects. And I think if you do that, you're going to end up ultimately in the right place.
And again, going to timing, talk about your time at Tulane and New Orleans. I think you said you were right there before Hurricane Katrina. Then you started here 2 years ago, about a year into COVID. I mean, those had to be some challenging times.
Yeah.
At both locations.
Well, I tell you what, when you're, let's see, 24, maybe 20, now it's 24, I guess, when Katrina hit, maybe been 25. So I'm a year and a half under my belt, still young, still not experienced necessarily, still kind of a more entry-level type of gig at Tulane, and a natural disaster of that magnitude strikes a city, a region, and knocks everybody to its knees, and certainly Tulane and the institutions down there. Sometimes you're just naive enough, or you're just inexperienced enough to kind of shrug your shoulders and say, hey, what can I do to make a difference? And I was lucky to be one of about half of the department that was able to keep the job. Not because I was exceptional, but just because of the role I was in. They needed somebody that could do some of the fundraising stuff, certainly. And I just kind of went along for that ride. And I learned so much. I learned what real adversity looks like. I learned what operating in a lean fashion looks like. I learned, I think something that stuck with me for forever since that time, which is, what does it mean to be truly committed to something far greater than your own individual needs, desires, wants? And that, was a young person, was really important, because I'm understanding globally, this is a community that's devastated. This is a great institution that's just trying to figure out how to turn the lights back on, and how to make an impact there, I think, is something that I've carried through. And honestly, whether it be COVID or some of the other challenges that we all face at whatever junctures, I think getting that experience early has definitely made a difference and prepared me for adversity, because we know adversity's coming.
And from Tulane, you went to Northwestern and took on more responsibilities. I should know this story, but I'm not sure if I do. When KU, did they come calling to you, or did you say, hey, I might be interested? Or walk me through, how did that first come about?
Yeah, they had a search firm employed, KU did. And so there's a little kind of a song and dance there, where you know who the search firm is. The search firm has a great snapshot of potential targets, some of whom have KU ties, many of whom don't have. And you're trying to find balance with not being, over the top with outreach, right? Or trying to make yourself known, or indicate your profound interest. And so there's a little bit of a nuance with that. And ultimately, they knew I was out there. I knew where, generally speaking, they were going to conduct an open search, and then next thing you know, you start to, develop a dialogue with the search firm, and then they had a great search committee that I'll forever be indebted to, who.
A lot of KU ties on that.
Yeah, a lot of KU ties, a lot of KU passion, and they were an incredible team with Julie Murray in the Chancellor's office, and then of course Chancellor Girard. And without any of the 6 individuals, I mean, you take away one and you take away certainly 2, I'm probably not here. It just was that confluence of the ideal group who, if they could find somebody that had some ties, had a passion, had a care for the place, and of course had all of the required experiences, and in particular at that moment in time, probably some experiences and capabilities that were even more needed in this tenure, then they were going to go for it. And again, humbled and forever indebted to that group.
I don't know if you remember, over 2 years ago, going through the interview process, you talk about the passion, your ties to KU, and of course your background. Any idea really what you think you were able to sell yourself, how you were able to sell yourself to the committee?
Yeah, I think,
something really jump out?
Well, I would say that I had to sell myself consistently. I had to be authentic, one. So if you've not been an AD, which I'd never been an AD, I can't present myself as having been an AD. I can't claim to have done things or led things or been the final decision point that aren't reality, right? So I had to be authentic and sincere and honest out of the gates. And then I had to be consistently that throughout. I could only be Travis Goff. If that wasn't going to be enough, then no sweat, right? I totally understand that. So that was one. And then I think 2, I'd worked long enough in this industry. I'd certainly had awareness around some of the challenges for Kansas athletics, especially at that moment in time. I had to be really polished on addressing some of the concerns they would have about my candidacy. And I had to go and attack that. I couldn't sit back and wait for them to ask me about well, hey, have you really ever hired a football coach? The answer is no, I'd never hired a football coach. I've been involved. I'd been highly involved in other searches, but I was never the decision maker for a football coach position. So I had to be able to really bring to life what my search process was going to look like, right? Obviously all the critical leadership experiences. I had to be able to articulate an understanding of all the change that was occurring in college athletics. And nobody can predict exactly where that's all going, but that was something that, not having been an AD, was going to be a little bit of a liability for me. So trying to really attack that on the front end.
Talk about the changes in athletics. I mean, wow, when you think about starting your career in the early 2000s, NIL was not a thing, transfer portal wasn't a thing, I mean, social media wasn't a thing.
Yeah,
I mean,
that's the truth.
how do you manage all that?
You don't. The answer is you don't. Anybody claiming to manage all those things in some perfect manner, or even remotely perfect manner, is not being honest about that. I think you try and keep it all out in front of you, right? In a lot of ways, you try and keep it all, within the line, so to speak, of understanding. There are days and there are weeks when in our evolution in NIL is the most important thing. There are days and there are weeks when trying to manage the financial strain that comes with this level of intercollegiate athletics are the most important thing. And it doesn't mean you drop these other aspects. It just means you have your eyes on it. You have great people around you, certainly, that are steering that and leading those dynamics day in and day out. And then you really continue to be attentive to the things that matter most. And you try and, to the best of your ability, stay out in front to an extent on the evolution and the changes that are coming. So I'd say that's probably, as much as anything, a big part of it. But I tell you what, you don't do it without great people, and you don't do it without some agreement and alignment on where we're trying to go.
And speaking of social media, you're a great fellow on Twitter. You do a great job of obviously promoting KU athletics, but you blend in some family photos. I know you just had your student athletes over, the international student athletes for dinner. What is your social media philosophy? Are you trying to use the word authentic? I would think that's part of it.
Yeah. I think, in fact, it may go no further than that. I mean, I'd never sent a tweet in my life up until 2 years ago.
Okay.
And I remember sitting in my office, like at the end of my first week here, and my head was spinning, and I'm going, and one of my great employees comes in and says, "Hey, you need to send a tweet." I'm like, "That's it was my second tweet. My first tweet was when my son was born." So anyway, that was my first tweet. This would have been my second tweet. And they literally sat there and wrote the tweet for me. I'm like, I probably got some work to do. Long and short of it, it isn't that strategic. It is definitely about, showing kind of who I am. I think that's important. I think when you're in a leadership position, people need to feel like they're connecting and know you and what makes you tick and what matters most. And in my case, it's KU and it's my family, right? Generally speaking, when I talk about my social media use. And then at the end of the day, it's telling the story and promoting amazing student athletes and coaches in an athletic program. I think that's on a real exciting uptick. That's probably that simple.
And I think you have a little fun on Twitter from time to time. I don't know if you remember this, right before the Liberty Bowl, you had a little fun at Missouri's expense. I thought that was very well done, very subtle.
Yeah.
Did you get much feedback on that one?
Listen, I don't know how much feedback I got. I don't know how many likes. I was proud of it. I'll put it this way. I told my wife, I said, "Hey, you got to take a look at this tweet I just sent around this whole Missouri issue." And she kind of gave me the eyebrow, but I thought it was funny.
It was very well done.
A couple others did, apparently.
So before you go, I know I always ask our alums, we're getting close to commencement next month. Any advice you share? I mean, either J School alums or just KU alums in general. What can they expect? Once they graduate, walk down that hill, and what kind of skills should they be prepared to develop?
Yeah, I mean, I think by that juncture, you've got a great foundation. I think it's to have confidence in your foundation, right? You're walking down this hill at KU. You're prepared, right? You're not fully prepared. No one's fully prepared, but you're ready to go and do great things. So I think it's to have some confidence. I think it's to be true to yourself. Right, so be genuine, be authentic. But I'm going to give a but to that, and the but is really be working on how to be the best version of yourself. And I'm not talking about perfection. I'm talking about just sharpening up. If we're all unfinished products at the time in which you walk the hill at KU, 22, 23, 24, whatever it is, there needs to be a recognition that you got a long way to go. And how do you do that? For me, a lot of it was not getting comfortable, breaking out of the comfort zone, right? Not just conceding to, well, this feels okay and feels kind of comfortable and easy. It's to embrace challenges. And I think when you do that, you're putting yourself in position. And then the other thing that is pretty straightforward is do the work. Work hard, demonstrate a work ethic, demonstrate, character and integrity, treat people the right way. I think if you took that totality, the formula for success is pretty high. And those dynamics and those attributes aren't complicated at all.
Well said, Travis. I think Chancellor Gerard might be passing you the mic for commencement. I don't know.
No, don't do that. Don't do that.
Hey, I appreciate your time. I always like to close with a little cheers. And cheers to your career. Thanks,
Absolutely.
Travis.
Cheers. Thanks, Steve.